Okay, so welcome to the Node.js Community N-API Team meeting for February 3rd, 2019. Happy New Year to everybody. We'll follow our standard agenda of going through the milestone 11. But before we start that, does anybody have anything they want to announce or let other people know, so forth? No? Okay, so why don't we start off by looking at the first one. Here, I'm going to share my screen. Sorry. Share this guy. Okay, and I'm just going to take a second to pop open the participants so I can see if somebody joins. Okay, so the first one is focus area on async worker. I know I'm just back and catching up, so I haven't done anything. I think, Gabriel, you'd opened at least one issue or PR to start looking at that.
Yeah, I just added the suppress destruct in a PR. That's all I've had time for.
Okay, no, sounds good. I expect most people have been out pretty much over the holidays, so we'll continue to push on that. 22754, investigate N-API to avoid future breakages. I do see there's some comments, and it was that, yeah, Glenn, you were the one who basically took a stab at porting the npm time function, right?
Yes, so I'm never quite sure which forum. So yeah, I got it to work. I contacted the owner and he was like, yay, great. I told him everything we were doing. One of the things I think we have to be aware of when we start doing this conversion from NAN to basically the Node add-on, using a Node add-on API module, is that a lot of these modules were written at a time when, like, Travis didn't do Windows testing and other things. So when I've actually run things using Travis, yeah, it works great on Linux-based platforms, but some of the unit tests actually don't pass. And that's perhaps for another discussion. But as we convert them, we're actually going to start seeing there are problems with well-used packages. Well, this is perhaps only 2,000 downloads a week. I didn't want to start particularly big.
Sure.
Okay, so just I haven't written any C++ in a decade, but I do have 20 years prior experience to that from AT&T. Like, I was right at the beginning, and it came back after a day or two.
Yep, I expect it should.
It came back. Oh yeah, I remember this stuff. So there's actually quite a lot of things I didn't realize. So basically, if you want to convert from a project from NAN, you actually have to have some idea of how NAN works.
Right.
And I just read up on the new stuff. So this may be for future discussion, but as we convert more, it may be good for people to start off on something small like this that allow their code to be looked at by other people before we go to big things like Node SAS that was on the list. I saw lots of, and I was uncomfortable even attempting something like that.
That's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd ask is, of the things you found, can any of them be added to, like, we have, I don't know if you tried out the tool that helps to try and do the conversion between NAN and...
I did not know there was a tool.
Okay.
So I've plenty to learn. I just read the documents, and they were quite good. One of the things I would say about the documents, they're very good on APIs, but I think most developers mostly go from examples. So the work examples you gave at Node Summit on the West Coast at the end of last year, the workshop was the best help for me. Actually, the workshop is just lots of examples. You know how we work. Like, it comes back. Oh yeah, right. This is the way we should do it. Just like we should take. And the fact that you had both NAN and Node add-on API helped a great deal, because I could switch between the two. So that actually was a big help. So that workshop, and it may take time for the payoff to come with people like me coming on, but at the time you maybe didn't get a payback, but now that's how I learned how to do this from your workshop.
Okay, no, that's great feedback, and so it really says we need to continue to add to the Node add-on examples.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking what we can sort of take out from your experience is, one, we should make it publicize more the the conversion tool, because I was wondering, like, if you found there were some things that you needed to know about NaN, if we can codify any of those into that tool, that helps. Now it's not perfect, and sometimes I think it might be easier not to use the tool. So it's a balance. And then the other thing is, like, if there's any specific examples that you can think of that weren't covered, maybe opening at least an issue in the Node add-on examples to say, hey, in converting this, these were some examples that might have been useful, because it's a good point. People do like, the comparing between the different ones.
Yeah, that, and the fact that I think perhaps I took a module that had been last changed, over 5 years ago, and things have changed a lot in 5 years. Yeah,
right.
Imagine how much JavaScript has changed. But more than that, like the ability to test. So this did have Travis YAML file, but now you can do Windows and stuff, and those hadn't been run. And what do we do with a module when we have to say to the owner, yeah, this works great on OS X, Linux, probably on a Pi, but when you go into the Windows environment, some of the C++ may not have ever worked. So I went back to the master branch and running, and there were some issues. Like a quarter of the test bombed out. So what do? We have to make a decision for modules. So do you want to fix things, or if you fix them, do you break stuff that other people have made allowances for? That was my worry.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd be tempted to.
Perhaps we should cover that on the maintenance one, because we're getting into maintenance.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I might leave that out of the N-API scope.
Yeah.
And my first thought is, if it's never been a problem, like from the N-API side, our main concern is getting adoption and transition, right?
Yeah, that's what I gathered.
Fix all the other problems. If it was never a problem that it didn't work on Windows up until now, then let's not solve that problem too. Let's get them moved over, and if that's a real problem, it'll bubble up some other way.
Yeah, that's my take. Take a small one, find out. So I think perhaps what I'd like to do, and on these meetings going forward, I've talked to people here where I work. We'll have more people on a package maintenance call, and if we can get some more people involved in this, I will. But I think there's quite a lot of interest. But a lot of people didn't know about what was going on, and I'm just walking around like we have 1,000 developers here on my floor, and just telling them.
Excellent. So you're telling them and saying, hey, because that's part of that package maintenance effort, is really how do we get companies like yours and people sort of enabled and aware and getting involved. So that's really good. In terms of Node time specifically, like, so the package maintainer said, great. Is it basically going to be that the next version uses?
Well, yeah. So I contacted him last night on the way home on the train, and he was all for it. What I wanted to do, I didn't want to go any further until I talked to you in that sort of maintenance diaspora and formed a smaller group, because we've got, like, I don't know how many people now, to discuss how we use the N-API, how we go about converting, because the two are kind of tied together, the package maintenance, because the feedback is what's going to allow you to know what to change and what the problems are. And I'm going to go to him. This is a PR. I've not fixed any of the existing bugs on Windows, but I have converted from NaN to N-API, and it works great. Here are the new Travis tests. We're doing it on Node 8, 10, and the latest. Everything seems to be fine. Do you want to publish a new package? So before I have that discussion with him, he said yes. I thought I should come back to you, and perhaps we should have that discussion in the maintenance one for the users of the N-API for maintenance purposes, converting from NaN to N-API.
Right. Okay. So, but which conversation?
So as consumers in the package of consumers of N-API, we need to discuss how we go about it. We can get the package owners' consent, and they're happy with it. Then we have to say, when we raise a PR, do we highlight things we've found that are wrong? Do we just wait for them to publish a package? Do we nudge them? I think this guy, Two-Tool Nate, who owns Node Time, will just go and publish it once I raised the PR. I didn't want to do that until I talked a bit more with the maintenance group and with you. And it's just sort of a process. I know this is the first one, maybe, that we just went and contacted a guy and said, hey, that thing you wrote some time back. They've got this new interface, and but he apparently knew all about it. When I checked up, he's still very much involved in technology, and he was just great. That was his answer.
Yeah, I think Nicolas has done some similar, ported some packages and reached out. So I mean, because we've been doing it in the scope of the N-API team in terms of trying to do what we can do to enable sort of adoption. So I think I'd encourage you just to pursue that one in terms of like, hey, if he's happy to land it, that'd be great.
I'll do that then. Yeah. And
I guess my recommendation is like, if there's these other things and there's failures, it's just like saying, hey, and by the way, I noticed this. It's always helpful. It doesn't,
Yeah, that's what I'll do. Because I think it's not been touched for like 7 years. And I think if there were serious Windows users with problems, it would have been known by now.
Exactly. And that's where, like, in terms of the context of the packet maintenance, I think we'd really want to focus on the ones that are causing friction and pain and stuff like that. Because, we've had the discussion a few times. You can't fix everything. So let's fix things that people are complaining about.
Using.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so no, that's great news on that front. Let's see. I'm just looking level down. It was 27 days ago, so I don't see anything else on that front. SQLA part, I don't have an update on there. I haven't had a chance to get together with Anisha, and she's probably been away like I have over Christmas, but we'll try and get back and connect with the maintainer there, because we really need some more insight into how the logging is done, because it uses something that's not obvious. And Jim also mentioned when he was back, he might get involved to help out. Burning down a list of issues raised by module owners. Are there any new ones that people want to call out this week?
I'm not sure if this qualifies for this part of the milestone, but I think Philip has been super active in Node Add-on API. So I don't know, maybe we should go over those PRs, or I don't know how.
I'm sure let's. I did land a bunch of them yesterday.
Maybe that's the next part of the agenda. I don't know.
We can dive. Why don't we dive into Node Add-on API? So looking at the pull requests or other things? Because I actually went through and landed at least 3 yesterday.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, there's I guess the pull requests are the essential ones, but also the issues.
Okay, so let's go back to issues, because I think, so in terms of pull requests, the cleanup class, I think there was still some more discussion going on.
Yeah. I think we'll have a re-implementation of the cleanup class.
Yeah. Okay, so there was some discussion of CMake. The thing in my mind is, like, it may be one thing, and this came to me after, so I haven't really commented on the issue. It may be one thing to switch the build/test of Node Add-on API to CMake, but there's a fair amount of integration with JIP, I think, in terms of like downloading header files and stuff like that make add-ons build in general.
Yeah, you're right. We're talking about native add-ons, right? So we're pretty much sort of pushing everybody in the ecosystem to move to CMake at that point, if we require CMake for building,
right?
So that's a big step, because we'd be like the first add-on to do that,
right? And that's where I rekindled the discussion in Node Core. Ben Nordis had done some work to explore using CMake in Node Core. But there's not consensus on that. But I rekindled that discussion because it would have been an easier decision if, like, oh yeah, the long-term direction of Node Core is CMake, then okay, it makes sense to look at it for add-ons and so forth.
Yeah, because I don't know how, like, at some point we'd have to add the documentation, like especially for Windows users, download CMake from here, add it to your path, that kind of thing. Because right now that all of that is not needed.
Right.
If you install Node, it just has everything. I mean, you need a tool chain, obviously, but you don't need any of the build tools.
Right, because Node.js comes along with it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no. So that it's those kind of issues we need to think very carefully about. And so I think it's interesting to consider, and I was particularly interested since it was the same one as potentially being suggested for core.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of a long discussion and exploration and whatever to figure stuff out.
Yeah, I don't know. I get the impression that it has to start with core. Core has to drive this because otherwise we just don't have the kind of leverage to actually get everybody to install CMake all of a sudden. Yeah,
well, I agree. Like it needs to be, here's what core is doing regardless of how you're writing your add-ons.
Yeah.
And I know that, Node.js we kind of think is not our long-term solution, although it could be if we just continue to maintain it. So.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like since unlike Node.js, CMake is a standalone package and it is being used by people out there on all platforms. So I'm not sure if it's that big of a stretch for either core or for our add-on to say, install CMake using your usual package installation procedures.
The reason it's a big jump though is because today, well, I guess if you're not using native modules, there's nothing to install.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I guess in the case of native modules, you have to install the compiler anyway.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's maybe not. Yeah. Anyway, I think.
No, if you don't have native add-on, you don't need anything
right
on your machine. So it's a good thing because you don't care of compiler and all the tools that you need to build a native add-on.
Right, but I guess if you do have a native add-on, then you have to install the compiler. So is adding CMake to that such a big deal?
Yeah, it's yet another thing to install.
It is, but okay. So I think we can continue that discussion in GitHub. But it's interesting.
But the idea for me could be that like Node.js provide the zip installation. If you want use CMake, we need to do the same thing to avoid developers take care of install all these tools.
Right. Except unlike Node.js, I believe that very few developers use JIP as installed globally for their own projects, whereas CMake is a tool they might already be using, right? So if we ship a version of CMake with Node and they already have a version of CMake because of their own project, then we might get a conflict and we might get into issues where, depending on what version of CMake is first on the path, it's going to do different things and build differently.
The other thing too is, like, if you're going to, we don't ship the compiler, right? I mean, people have mentioned doing that, but we don't ship the compiler. So
no.
Where do you draw the line, right? Like, if you have to install the dev tools in, say, Ubuntu, and then you have to install CMake, is it that much of a difference?
Yeah. So,
but I think it's a long discussion.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But still interesting, because like we have this JIP problem, and it's worth having some discussion about it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember a time when Node add-ons were compiled using like a shell script.
Yeah.
And, so there was a time pre Node.js, right? So I guess we've derived a heck of a lot of utility from having switched to Node.js, but I mean, we do have to switch away at some point.
Right. Now, some of the things like the downloading of headers and all that kind of stuff, I think that would still have to be covered, right?
Well, I'm not 100% sure, because my understanding is that like NVM, for example, it downloads the headers when it installs a new version of Node, right? Like it just puts the headers in all the right places, and then Node.js takes care of making sure that the include paths are there, right? So in that sense, you know,
Well, I
with
think even if
CMake,
you just take the binaries and zip them, it'll take care of getting the headers for you.
okay, well, but NVM will though, right?
No, I think the existing build infrastructure for the add-ons would take care of that.
Okay.
So you don't have to use NVM. Just take the existing binaries, unzip them, and then
Oh, I see. So you mean like if you, okay, but correct me if I'm wrong. Anytime you install Node, whether it be from a Debian package or from NVM, I mean, okay, with the Debian package, you have things like node-dev or whatever, but I'm assuming you're installing that, right? Like if you are installing that, you are getting the headers, right?
Well, but no, like what I'm talking about is you can go to the Node download site.
Yeah.
Just get a raw zip file.
Yeah.
Unzip that. I don't believe the headers are there.
Ah,
However,
okay. I see.
Node.js has the logic and everything built in to say, I'm building this. Glenn has a comment.
So yeah, so I mostly work like behind the firewall, and trust me, it's a pretty effective firewall, and almost nothing. Yeah, trust me. So this is a problem I live. I actually give talks on how tough it is to other fintech type people. We have to, during some of the builds now. I've noticed what's happening is it's automatically downloading the headers. Yeah.
Yep.
But more than that, even if you've got the headers, it'll try and get them anyway and overwrite the ones you've got. And as an alternative, you have to tell it, these are my headers on this path. When you're actually you have to set up an environment variable to actually overcome this. Yeah. And for people actually behind the firewall, for a lot of us, where actually there's a lot of node work that goes on that's not really publicly viewable. We have to do exactly as you've said. We have to go out. We have to get the headers. Yeah. We have to put them somewhere on our network so that they can be, or we have to check them in somewhere that's accessible from us. We cannot go to GitHub. We will use an equivalent Git server hosted behind a firewall. So we have to make sure that everything is available. And I think going forwards for Node as a whole, as it becomes more widely adopted in the enterprise, and trust me, for companies like mine, this was a big thing. We have to make it easy because it is actually very hard working behind the firewall because it's assumed that we can just go out to GitHub and pull things down. And trust me, we can never go to GitHub and pull things down. We have to get them down. We have to ask somebody to host them somewhere behind the firewall. They ask us, what are these C++ and .h things? And we explain to them, well, they're the header files. So
what I love is a issue somewhere that has a list of problems you face working behind the firewall with Node.
I'll send you a link to a talk.
Okay.
But that's all I can say on YouTube.
Yeah. Okay. Because I mean, I think in the community, it'd be great to have a list like that because that would give us something to focus some attention on and say, these are the problems that, people are reporting in terms of they're struggling with this. What can we do to help out with those? So not necessarily related to N-API specifically, but just Node core. That's something I think it would be good to have captured.
Many thanks.
Okay. Philip, thanks for joining. If you're trying to talk, you're on mute.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, fine. Hi.
Hi, we were just talking a little bit about, I don't know how much of the conversation you caught about CMake and some of the complications and so forth.
Yeah, I found 10 minutes before something.
Okay. Yeah. So I think it's interesting to kind of think about, but I do think it's going to be a long discussion and we need to figure out what core is doing in terms of Node.js and stuff to sort of figure out what the right direction would be.
Yeah. Yeah, also this package here, actually, used with the branch was CMake.js, and it somehow also injects the header files from your home directory in a .cmake.js folder, and there are all the header files of the Node core. And I don't know if they download it or they copy it, because the header files, they are delivered with the Node within the binaries. So I don't know if they copy them or they download them, but they provide them like Node chip.
Okay, I'm not quite sure how that would happen, but are you using like the source tree to build Node, or was it from the binaries?
Just the binaries.
Okay.
There is an include folder, and there are all the header files.
Okay. Because there's a separate download for the header files too.
So it sounds like we need not only CMake, but we need CMake.js, right? So because that seems to be like a modification that handles Node add-ons specifically.
Okay.
So you have some variables with all the header files, and maybe if libraries or something are needed, then they are there, and you can link them and include them.
Okay, so that's interesting as well. So like if there's already people who are using CMake to build their add-ons, it'd be interesting to know how pervasive that is. But like if there's enough people using that would be an argument maybe for Node add-on API to support that and Node.js, right?
Yeah, side by side would be best, I guess.
Right. Okay, we should probably move on to some of the other questions. So the confusion about N-API version, N-API experimental. I think I made a few comments in the issue itself and opened a PR there. I think we're kind of in agreement. I don't think there's any disagreement. Anything we should talk about on that front?
No, I think we need both. At least in core, we definitely need both. Because if you, in a way, if you tell people to only include N-API headers, then Node or N-API version should actually not be defined, right? And so when you say N-API experimental and then you include N-API headers, then the preprocessor should crank up the version to maximum positive integer. But in your project you might have other Node headers included. I mean, even if you just include Node version.h so as to make decisions based on some other versions that Node version.h tracks in your code at compile time, at that point, you need N-API experimental because as you're checking other preprocessor variables for different things inside Node against which you're building, for perhaps completely orthogonal reasons to N-API, the side effect is that now your N-API version is set to 3. And so you need N-API experimental to actually get the experimental APIs if you're using them.
Right.
So I think we need the two. I don't think we can get away with restricting or with making decisions based on whether N-API experimental is defined or not. We need to base it on that. Even though technically the only reason why we define N-API experimental is so that we might crank up the version of N-API or the value of N-API version.
Right. I think we still need it in our test files so that it does get cranked up unless you override it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So we cannot assume that N-API version greater than 3 is the same as saying N-API experimental.
Yes.
Because it might not be greater than 3, and yet experimental might be needed.
Yep. Okay. Let's see. Continue discussion there in the PR. Were there any other particular ones? The run-in node thread, Philip, did you want to talk to that one a little bit?
Yeah, my first test with N-API was actually that it's interesting to run some code native, but maybe it's also very interesting to have something like a multi-threaded native module, and you want to make a call back to JavaScript, and this somehow has to be, yeah, thread safe. And because of that, and like, I don't know, maybe you've done some Android developing or something like this. You always have the problem with there is only one thread which is allowed to make some calls, and they have something like a run in main thread, something like this. And I think it would be good to have something like this run in node thread, where you can have an environment injected, and you can, yeah, you can create a scope, you can create variables and whatever you like.
Okay, so in that run in node thread, that's running in the node main thread or in a separate thread?
In the main thread.
The main thread, okay. So it's basically saying run this other thing in the main thread. And that's all something you believe we can build with the existing thread safe APIs, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
So there's we've had like about a month ago a discussion about async worker and how we could do the opposite, which is to make it as simple as possible to run something in a secondary thread by simply passing a lambda into like an async worker and having the lambda executed on the secondary thread. So I'm just wondering, do you guys see this as coming into sort of a focus, in the sense that we've got this situation where either you want to run something asynchronously from the main thread, or you want to call into the main thread from a secondary thread? Can we sort of unify this? Because I'm thinking, like, for async worker, right? If you want to just run like a lambda async, right, then the threading is already done for you by Node.js. But on the other hand, if you have your own threading and you want to call into the main thread, then you have to use thread safe function, right? So, do we keep these things separate, or do we just, or can is there a way to unify these things so that you can tell it to run something asynchronously, or you can call back into the main thread? I get this feeling like it should be possible, but it's very vague. So I'm not sure if that even makes any sense. Sorry.
Yeah, I think the point of can we have one concept instead of two is worth.
Yeah,
it's kind of what you're saying. Like, does it really need to be something completely separate, or is there some commonality
because the thing is, I was thinking, like, if you have something like a async worker bracket lambda something, right?
Yeah.
If you do something like that, then from inside that, the way async worker works is that you cannot call back into the main thread, and you have to wait for the async stuff to finish, and then it'll say, okay, I'm done, and it'll run the on OK handler and so forth.
Right.
But I've seen instances where I've had at least one example, or I gave one example to one person, where you want to call back from like the thread. Yep. That is a thread pool thread, and you want to call back during execution rather than after execution. So then you use a thread safe function. But now you're talking about calling in from a secondary thread. So what difference is there between whether that is a node thread pool managed thread, or whether that is your own thread? The only difference is that in one case you don't have to create the thread. Node will create it for you, right? But you have to use a thread safe function in either case.
Right.
So I'm thinking, like, if we do this lambda thing to launch something on a secondary thread, then we have two choices. We can either just do a very thin wrap around async worker and do things the way we do them now, or we could add more flexibility with an additional parameter in the lambda that the lambda accepts, which is the means to call back to the main thread, i.e. a thread safe function. And so right. you have like two different signatures.
Yeah.
And you create the thread safe function conditionally on which signature was used. And And so that I think would be a first step towards unifying these two concepts. But then the thing that you pass into the async function should be the same thing that you can pass into, that you can just create on its own without having to create the async function, and then you can use it with an existing threading implementation. So does that mean that that thing is a very, very thin wrapper around an async function, or can we provide more value than that? You know, that's I think something worth exploring in terms of the threading and how we do this in Node.js N-API.
Okay, so it'd probably be worth putting, like, if you know what that might look like in a comment on Philip's.
Yeah,
there,
I think
right?
Philip had some. You had some really, really elegant code there in a few examples where you can just like, you have like really intuitive way of calling across threads, and so that's why I'm kind of glad that you're here. So I see that this example, for example, is also very elegant because it simply runs stuff, and you know that it's going to eventually at some point run in the Node.js main thread, and so I think it was it Eric who was here a few weeks ago, and he had an idea for the opposite, which is to just sort of fire something off onto a secondary thread. So these two are sort of complementary to each other, and we should really think about doing an API that can do both of these and that can realize both of these very intuitively for people to use.
Agreed. So
Okay.
I guess it's just, we'll continue adding to that thread in terms of like, okay, here's the other things we should consider, and
yeah, because
if we can work towards an API that covers both use cases.
Yeah, my general impression is that multi-threading is really in demand now for Node.js, and we should probably cater to that, especially since we have the low-level APIs. We just need to sort of wrap them nicely.
Well, certainly in the add-ons, I think that's common that you have, you don't want to block the main thread, so you need some other threads to go off.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
yeah, that would be an example. Like if you have a very old API, like the API which is blocking.
Yep.
Then if you're using the async work, I think you're getting, I don't know if it's an V8 thread, or at least you cannot tweak the thread. It's not, you cannot say that it's a high priority thread or a low priority thread or whatever.
it would end up being a thread in Node's thread pool, I believe, which is by default, there's only 4 of them.
Yeah, but you have no control over them, right? So if you want to say, okay, make this low priority,
yep,
then you can't do that. So you'd have to roll your own threading implementation at that point.
Yeah, and certainly your comment about can we come up with an API that lets you do either?
Yeah,
I think is nice, so that you can say, oh, if you want to start your own, manage your own threads, great, do this. If you have, if you just want to use one of the existing thread pool things and not have to worry about that, well, okay. Use the, you don't have to learn something completely new. You can do the same thing, just maybe a few different parameters or whatever.
Yeah, I'm thinking, Philip, this running node thread thing. I'm thinking if we made this into like a callable, then that would give us really nice. That would give us a really nice interface, because you could set up like a subclass of N-API thread safe function, right? Like assuming we have like a C++ class N-API thread safe function, you could set up a subclass which is callable, and then the subclass would define the marshalling between the native and the JS and back, right? And then you would simply call it as if it were a function, and you would pass it. The parameters to the function would just be like the native stuff, like integers or pointers to data structures or whatever, and then it would result in a JavaScript function call on the JavaScript side, and then that would be like a run in Node thread, but it would look like a normal function call, So basically, the reason I'm thinking about formulating it this way is that if it is, as you say, you have like a really old code base, right? If you want to inject calls into JavaScript into that code base, then you want to inject as little code as possible, and you want it to be as succinct as possible. Like you basically want to say like inform JavaScript bracket, status is 0, void star, data is here, that kind of thing. And so you just inject one line into that big giant threading thing, and it just fires a call back to JavaScript. And it's as clean as possible. And all the implementation of how that call actually happens is in the binding code rather than in the threading code. What do you think about that?
Yeah, but you said something about classes. Like I'm not a big fan of subclassing. I think that functional purpose in C++ can also be there, like in JavaScript. So like async worker is, I think also it's a bit it's not that easy to use. So it's not just a functional calling. And I would like to have it somehow very functional, that it's like no boilerplate code or subclassing or whatever. And like some guys want to use, I don't know, Rx, for example, reactive extensions or whatever, and they can do it like they just run in Node.js something what they want. So that's the reason.
So if you wanted to call from a thread of your own making, like not a thread pool thread, or actually I don't even know if it matters. If you wanted to call into JavaScript from a secondary thread, then how would this look like functionally?
Yeah, it's something like a small time slot which is reserved, and the main loop somehow enters this slot, and native code is executed. So it's, I don't know how it's implemented in Node.js, but like if some IO stuff is implemented with threads, then they have to call back and say yes, like this. Yeah,
we have async handles, right? That's how that's done. You're basically the thread, the main loop itself is not thread safe. However, it does have a type of handle which is thread safe, and all that does is basically allow you to make a function call from any thread, and the result of the function call is that it will insert a handle into the main loop, which is attached to a callback which runs on the main thread.
Yeah.
So that's how that happens. But so the functionality that UV provides is very, very basic. Like the callback on the main thread is basically just like a void, just takes a void star, right? And it just gets back to handle with which you created this hook.
Yeah.
And so it's your responsibility to transfer the data from one thread to the other, make sure that the access to it is safe, and so on and so forth. And furthermore, the async handle doesn't guarantee one-to-one. So if you execute the function which results in waking up the main thread, if you execute that function, you call it like 59 times on the secondary thread, you may not get 59 calls on the main thread. You may only get one, if the secondary thread is fast enough, right? So in terms of ensuring one-to-oneness, that's where thread safe function comes in. But of course, it's still like it has to be asynchronous. So there's just no way around that. But
I just thought about something like the next tick function.
Yeah. That's essentially what it does. Essentially what it does. It says the next time you loop around, also execute this callback.
Yeah.
So, okay, but
I mean, I can try an implementation with this N-API thread safe. I also did it, but for example, the design of this N-API thread safe function, there are two parameters. One is the JavaScript callback, and one is a native callback. And I think it's not possible to only have a native callback. So the JavaScript callback is mandatory, and this JavaScript callback is a parameter of the native callback. Then it's like you can use it. And what I did is like I just pass on no operation callback JavaScript, and yeah.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. I kind of noticed that too. Like the thread safe function is like you're right in that it expects
You must
that
provide
you
the
will call into
JavaScript function.
JavaScript. Yeah.
But if you just want to go on with native world and you want to, yeah, I don't know.
No, I see what you're saying. It's not
Yeah.
granular enough. The thread
Yeah.
safe function is not granular enough. I guess ideally I should have made the JavaScript parameter or the JavaScript function parameter optional, because it does have a native function. I'm not even sure if that's not possible anymore. Like it might be possible, though I'm not sure what the semverness of that is if we all of a sudden made that optional.
It's probably semver minor at least. And the challenge is, though, if somebody writes code, like if you write code and you're using 8, but then you go back to 6 and say, well, wait a sec, why doesn't this code work?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I mean, it's no problem. I just provide a dummy operation and I don't use it.
Yeah, I think we had to do something like that earlier where...
But it's kind of awkward, but otherwise okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but then I guess yeah, if we did this yeah, then I mean, yeah, we could do something like this in Node.js N-API.
I mean, the possible implementation, so that's a fully working implementation?
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's not very much, not very big.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
So I think, it's from that perspective, it doesn't seem to be a concern like adding tons of code. The only question would be, how do we, how does it fit in with other, like you were saying, as opposed to having different concepts, how does it fit in with the other concepts that we have for going the other direction?
And we're also missing the thread safe implementation for Node API. I think it's not.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. It kind of needs that. Yeah, see, because I mean, it's not a lot of code, but it does use thread safe node calls, which is like a wrapper for N-API thread safe function. So we bring that in as well.
Okay, so thread safe node calls is right, but that's something we probably need a wrapper in Node.js N-API anyway, right? So
yeah. So I don't know, Philip. Like, can you maybe PR this thread safe node calls and the run in node thread, and then we can just hammer it out in a PR against Node.js N-API.
Yeah, I can. But also maybe, what about this shared pointer stuff? I think we need it because the class has to live on the heap, and it has to live until the lambda is called or destroyed. So we need somehow, it must be on the heap. And I think there is no need for any shared pointer or unique pointers in the Node.js API.
No. Yeah, we don't have any threading stuff right now. I mean, aside from async worker, but that's not really threading because their node does the threading.
No, I mean from the standard library, the shared pointer thing. It's enabled from this. Shared enabled from this implementation.
Yeah.
This would be also a new thing, like it's just modern C++, I think, but I think there is no class which needs the shared pointer.
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet.
Yeah, well, I mean, once you have the PR, right? We can run this on we can run the PR on the CI, and then we will get like pretty wide testing of it, because I think, Michael, you added all kinds of platforms. Now we're not just running on Linux anymore, right?
Oh yeah, we test on AIX, Linux, Windows, Mac OS.
Yeah, so if there are any problems, we should find them. If you add this.
Right. Now
I mean,
it should
be guarded. Standard library, so
it should be guarded with experimental to start with. Is it? Depends what it depends on what, like whether the thread safe functions are. We still have those as experimental, right?
Yes,
Hebrew?
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So it'll have to be guarded with experimental for now.
Yep. So, but I think they're like they're the first on the thread safe function is well on its way to becoming standard. I think it's probably going to happen in April when we drop 6, right? Because I don't think I can backport it all the way to 6.
No, I wouldn't say we want to backport it to 6, but I think we may want to bump, like, it's good to get the backport just as experimental. I threw in my ALGTM to the backport request.
Yes, thank you. I saw that.
But probably the next thing we do want to do is like, okay, yeah, in master, let's get it into like N-API 1.4 or 1.5, I forget.
Yeah, 1.4.
1.4, and start, getting that going backwards.
Yep. Yeah, I think once we have it in all the LTS versions, then it's just a matter of firing off a PR that just drops the experimental. It just moves it, or actually moves the guard around it.
And that may answer the question, like, because it's still experimental, I think it would actually be okay to make that parameter optional.
That's
right. That's
point.
One of the reasons we start things as experimental, is that we can actually change them.
Yes, you're right.
And we find that there's something that needs to change.
That's a very, very good point. And actually, everybody who uses it now will provide one because it wasn't optional before. So it's not going to break anybody's code. It's just going to, well, I guess it might break new code. Like if you write new code.
Yeah, if you write new code and stuff. But
yeah.
But I think that's, now's probably the time to do it if we think we need to do it.
Yes. Okay, but now we have a really nice race condition going with that PR being approved. So now there's going to have to be another PR that goes through 11 and 10 and 8.
Yeah, well, we'd need that to make it non-experimental anyway.
Yes. Oh, okay, but that should be 2 rounds though, right? Because it should stay experimental with the optional and then drop the experimental, right? Like, I don't think we'd want to combine them, or can we?
Yeah. Well, let's think that through. But possibly.
Otherwise, well, no, actually, you're right, because we could say that it's stabilized with this change.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically once it's non-experimental, then it's safe to use across all the versions where it's non-experimental. Because there could be cases where like it would stay experimental in 8 forever.
Yes.
Right, yeah, and then if you're using it with 8, okay, well that's, it's there, so the flexibility is there, but you're at a little bit more risk because it's not, we may still change it there, right?
Well, I don't think, like, given that this is N-API, I don't think we can change it in only one version. Like if we make any change, then it has to be backported before we can consider the change to have been fully made, right?
Yeah.
So
I definitely agree if it's like a hard breaking change. This is kind of the edge case, more of a slightly more edge case where it's like, if you wrote code in 8 and then went back, you'd have trouble, but only if you wrote it in. Yeah, the least breakage we can do, the better. Anyway, is.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So it's hard to. Yeah, it's hard to gauge because on the other hand, if we do introduce any sort of change, then we cannot stabilize it like immediately afterwards, because we do need like the incubation time to gauge the ramifications of the change, right? Because otherwise we're just kind of being arbitrary, like True. yes, it's stable, and then ask questions later. But on the other hand, I'm just thinking, like, given what we just saw from Philip, that all it takes is like a dummy function. I don't think that's such a high price to pay. Like, it would be nice to have it elegant, but I'm not sure if it's worth the upheaval of these 2 rounds of PRs.
Yeah,
when all you have to do is, is just have a dummy function. And I mean, Philip did it with a native function, but you can just as easily do it with the JavaScript function. Just take whatever function is available to you, because the chances are when you're dealing with threads, you're going to have a callback coming in from JavaScript anyway, because otherwise, like, what do you do with it? You know, like, what do you do with the information coming back from the thread if not to somehow inform JavaScript, right? So you'll probably have access to some JavaScript function, and then you can just sort of toss that around and call it a day, you know?
Yeah,
Right.
agreed.
Okay, so yeah, if it's not a big deal, then yeah, I'd agree. We don't want to have work and delay for something we don't think is a big deal.
Yeah. All right, cool. Yeah, this is looking awesome, Phil.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, and if you can, like, it sounded like there was a few things there that probably should be in separate PRs though, like the thread safe node calls, because
I'm not
that
happy with
sounds
the
like
name.
that's a wrapper around the thread safe native Node API stuff, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
something
so
like a tool, util class.
yeah, so that should probably be separate from the a PR for the run in node thread, just so that they can sort of be discussed and landed separately.
I think they must be together because we need, I think a run a node thread function is not possible because we need some encapsulation for this thread safe function structure.
Right, but I mean, one we want. I guess what I'm thinking is, like, regardless, we want some encapsulation in Node.js N-API for that thread safe function, right? Functionality.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't, you know, that could land on its own. And then the sort of the concept of run a node thread, whether that's, you know, in addition to async worker, or we can somehow combine them or something, is kind of a different discussion, right?
Yeah, I think the problem is that if you're using multiple lambdas to call into node, then you can use always the same object here, the same object from this node thread calls class. But we need one because we need to allocate this thread safe function handles. They live there.
Yeah, I think I kind of get Philip's point. Like, if we just have the thread safe function calls, that's not very useful on its own. You know, like run in node thread sort of wraps up the functionality. You know,
Sure.
So it's like
But
thread safe node calls is like the plumbing, basically.
right, but that's all we give in the core API, right?
Yeah.
So it's sort of like the building block. So like it comes back to that line where I saw Philip commented on one of the things, like that the JSON parse and stuff maybe doesn't belong in Node add-on API.
Yeah.
And I think the context on that one is, I think we were only considering that because it was in NaN already. And as a transition from NaN, it might have made sense from that perspective. But it's this I just get there because this is the same thing. It's like, you could just argue that, okay, well, you want to wrap what we've exposed in the C API, and that should let you do useful things without some sort of level of abstraction on top of it. Or else we
somehow
didn't.
the utility that you can call into a node thread, or you can have a callback on the node thread. I think it should be provided by the Node add-on API. But the problem is that we have to make one thread safe call, an API thread safe or create thread safe function, only one, and we can reuse it every time. So we only need one global node thread safe calls object, and we can reuse it for all lambdas.
Right. So I'm not arguing that we don't want more.
Yeah.
I'm just sort of my starting point is that, like, it's probably a no-brainer to say, well, we just land a wrapper for the thread safe stuff. And then there might be more discussion that goes on in terms of what the API should look like, how it fits in with async worker. So by having them as separate, one can land quicker while we have more discussion on the other concept. That's all.
Yeah.
So that's why I was just suggesting, like, if it was two PRs, one which sort of gives you the wrapper that mirrors what we have in the C API, and then a separate PR which adds the extra level of functionality on top, that would let us land one without concluding the whole discussion if we want to. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
I'm looking at the definition of thread-safe node calls on your N-API experimental repo, and I could be mistaken, but it looks to me like pretty much run in node thread is pretty much the business end of thread-safe node calls. So you could even you could even make this like a method on thread-safe node calls. It doesn't have to be separate because you already have the thread-safe node call, right? So you would have something like thread-safe node call X, and then you would have like x.run lambda, so on and so forth, and then that would convey the meaning that this runs in a thread-safe fashion. So run in node thread is very explicit in saying that it runs in the node thread, but the thread-safe function also conveys that meaning, because that's the point of the thread-safe function, is to call node, right?
Yeah.
So and given that the JavaScript callback is not optional, then if you modify thread-safe node calls to optionally accept the callback and use the no-op if none was given, right?
Yep.
Then you can just add a method that says run, and then you would have run in node thread as part of thread-safe node calls, and then it would be one PR. Because I mean, it is sort of one implementation. Like I see that here, like in your header, it really is one thing. So
and I don't think if I'm getting it right now, because so I mean, what you should not do is you should not create many thread-safe node call objects.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
You only need one, and you can just run a node thread and just the lambda, and it's fine.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. So it should. Well, yeah, I guess it should be. Yeah, it should be like one per threading implementation, basically, and you should be able to call it from an individual read.
Because like the constructor of this here, it's just having one N-API create a thread-safe function call, and it reuses this thread-safe function call every time. So every time we just run, we just call the run function of it. Just the N-API call is done, not a create thread-safe function. So we only have one thread-safe function handle.
Okay. I understand. I understand what you're saying. Yeah. So basically, okay.
This is a long-living object. Actually, it can be created on the heap and never dies.
Yes. Okay, I see what you're saying. So this is sort of like a channel for going between the secondary thread and the Node.js thread. Yeah. And actually, it's funny that you should mention that because this sort of behavior I noticed when I was writing the example where you have like the round trip function. It's in Node add-on examples where you call into Node.js and then Node.js returns a value and you asynchronously retrieve the return value on the secondary thread. What I noticed there was that you can have many different reasons to call Node.js, and you can use the same thread-safe function for all those reasons. And what ends up happening though is that you can have as much contention as you want. So you can basically ease things by having multiple points, but on the other hand, you're using more system resources. Or you can have one point and then you have higher contention, and your load behavior changes depending on that. But basically being able to tune how many thread safe functions you use is generally a desirable thing. But of course that's up to application programmers, not up to us to decide it. But I see what you're saying. Like you basically want to have just one way of calling Node.js, and then you can pass different lambdas for different reasons, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And you can do that, right? if you also, like with each Lambda, you can pass like a reference, because I believe it's okay to have references on secondary threads as long as you don't pass them to NAPI calls. Just having the reference is okay. Just don't make any API calls with the reference. And then if you pass it back into Node, it should be safe, and then Node will make the call. So then you can actually have different JavaScript functions that you call for different reasons.
Yeah, that would be another point, that our references are not copyable. So it's not possible that easy.
Right. Yeah.
I also tried this, so we have to come back to the C API to copy the.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's true. It should be possible, because they are, after all, just plain C pointers at the end.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Okay, so sounds like we have a lot of homework then.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're 10 minutes over, so I think at this point we should just take. It was good to get into some of the details there. I don't think we have too much to create matrix of tested methods. I don't think there's too much to say. Discussing how we advocate in use of badges in our documentation. Anything you wanted to add on that front, Gabriel?
No. That's the back of the back burner, unfortunately.
Right.
Sorry.
Okay, so I guess since we're over, I'd say let's call it for today, and we'll talk through GitHub between now and next week, and then get back next time.
Yep. Awesome to have you all on board.
Okay, great, and hope to talk to you, Glenn, and Philip again next week.
Thank you all.
Thanks for joining. Okay.
Bye.
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 Bye.